Hello and welcome. Today we're going to discuss circular economy and climate, and with me is Nigel Topping, the UK's high-level champion for climate action. Nigel, thanks very much for joining us. Maybe we can start by trying to elucidate what a high-level champion for climate action actually is.
Well, thanks. It's lovely to join you. The role of high-level climate action champion was created in Paris by the parties to the United Nations Climate Convention. Because in Paris, as well as creating the Paris Agreement, which says what nation states have to do, submit a plan and ratchet it every 5 years with the view to the 1.5 degree target, they also recognise that it's going to be impossible to get to those net zero targets without what they call non-state actors, businesses, investors, cities, regions, universities, citizens. So the role of a high-level climate action champion is to work with everyone who's not a nation state who's a party to the convention, to mobilise, to drive up ambition, to accelerate action, and then to use that momentum to help countries go faster, what we call the ambition loop. So the faster that businesses and cities go, the easier it is for governments to have bold policy. And of course, as governments lift the floor, then everyone else can go faster. So we go faster and faster towards zero.
So non-state actors, of which the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is one, and we recently joined the Marrakesh Partnership, which is the vehicle that helps bring those views to the table. Have you seen recently, and in the run-up to COP26, an increased importance given to circular economy solutions as a powerful contribution to climate change mitigation?
First of all, thank you for joining the Marrakesh Partnership. It was named after the COP after Paris, which was held in Morocco. And as you say, it's the global coalition of organisations working towards zero. So it's great to have Ellen MacArthur Foundation in there. And I would say that in the 5 years since Paris, we've seen an absolute sea change in awareness of the centrality of the circular economy to getting to the zero carbon economy. And your work at the Foundation has been absolutely central to that. I think there's been a sort of gradual maturity of really focusing on energy, so a big focus on renewables, and gradually realizing that the economics are with us, not against us as costs keep coming down. Then turning to transport, we see so much more about electrification of transport. But in the last few years, amongst those really focusing on climate, there's been a real awakening of the centrality of the material economy, not just the energy economy. And within that, a realization that we can't get to zero carbon materials without circularizing the materials bit of our economy. But I know the research you've done says maybe over 50%. No one's arguing that it's somewhere between 40 and 60% of the puzzle when it comes to cement, steel, plastics, etc. is circularity. So yeah, and that's very different from 5 years ago, I think.
And you're the former CEO of We Mean Business, so you have a very good view of what the climate is like in those discussions. What do you think is the biggest driver for the private sector? Because we know also that the SDGs benefited from an unprecedented support from the business community.
Well, it's a combination of things. I mean, above all, the science, right? I mean, the science is so clear. And every time scientists review the risks, their understanding of the impact gets worse for a given risk. And we know now that the COP26, the annual climate conference, has been delayed by a year. Before we get to Glasgow next November, the International Panel on Climate Change will have issued some more of their research, which will again show that the risk understanding is going up. So I think it's really led by the science. But then, of course, that starts to filter into other parts of society. So, young people have had a huge role in bringing to attention of policymakers, their future employees, their future voters. So politicians, local and national, are taking that very seriously. Young people have parents who are running businesses and running investment firms, and they're asking them very awkward questions. So the youth voice has been hugely important. And investors too are, understanding that this is an inevitable transition. In fact, the UN Principles of Responsible Investment have done a whole lot of research on what they call the inevitable policy response. Like, we know we're gonna get to zero, we're gonna have to. The question is, do we manage that together smoothly, or do we wait and panic and then destroy lots of value in a knee-jerk response to get us back on track? So I think it's a combination of the science, a generational shift in awareness, and a mixture of fear, anger, expectation, and the investor community. And then finally, I'd say is that we now have a pretty good idea of what the pathway to zero is, as I say, including circularity in a large extent in many sectors, but knowing that there's a pathway and that leading companies in every sector have committed to zero, all those things I think have led to the private sector really starting to ramp up their activity now.
And we also see a lot of policy making around this topic, and of course policy makers can give visibility for investors, which is absolutely key. This is why the interface between the private and the public sector is so important, which brings me to have a look at the national side of things. And countries are putting national roadmaps on the table. One of them is Chile, and you work alongside Gonzalo Munoz, who was the COP25 high-level champion, who's from Chile. And I know that you're very keen to bring the global south to the discussion. So what's your plan in order to give those countries more visibility at COP26?
Yeah, first of all, he's still the COP25 champion. The role runs for 2 COPs, so Gonzalo and I are working together. And he's a real champion of obviously the B Corp movement and the circularity in his work. So we're trying to do a couple of things. The first is trying to bring more global South partners into the Marrakesh Partnership. So that's an open invitation to civil society organisations working with businesses, investors, cities from the global South to get in touch and get involved. So we're reaching out. We're engaging a lot more. I had a dialogue with a group of Southeast Asian partners just a couple of weeks ago. Gonzalo, of course, has a very good network certainly in Latin America, and we're bringing more of those in. And we're actively working now in Africa and Southeast Asia to both engage more virtually now, but also to bring more partners into the Marrakesh Partnership. And in particular, we're focusing on Africa because, as you know, this is an annual cycle that the multilateral system goes through. I mean, Paris and Glasgow are like high points because of this 5-year cycle, but the next COP after Glasgow will be in Africa. So we're particularly keen, given the role of Africa as presidency of COP27. I will then work with an African climate action champion. We're particularly keen to build those relationships. And we're also, we've launched a big initiative on mitigation, but we're going to be launching a big campaign on resilience, which is relevant to everybody, but particularly relevant to the most vulnerable countries, the majority of whom are in the global south, of course.
And for those countries who depend largely on exporting their natural resources, circularity and circular economy can be perceived as a threat. What's the narrative that you can put on the table in order to get them on board?
Well, I think that's a real issue, right? I mean, we've known about the so-called resource curse for a long time, that being well endowed with natural resources does not always lead to positive development outcomes. But I don't think there's a trivial answer to that. I mean, if you're reliant largely on oil exports for your foreign exchange, then and you see like BP just publishing their new scenarios that oil's either peaked or going to peak in the next few years, and then it's into pretty serious decline. Then you've got a challenge. I know I'm working with colleagues in South Africa, an economy that relies a lot on different natural resources for its foreign earnings. So I think the balance is to find between starting to invest in the other natural resources. I mean, Australia would be a good example, right? Really a little bit stuck on its coal economy, but unbelievably well endowed with land and sun. So, has an opportunity to become actually much more energy dependent and to become a green hydrogen superpower. So I think it depends on every country, right? It's different in every country. And it's a question of looking at what the opportunities are to do better with the resources they've got. So circularity again plays a role there. And in particular, to look hard at their renewable energy resources. You mentioned Chile, for example. Chile's got a lot of solar resource, and as a result of that is very actively pursuing its role as a leader in the green hydrogen economy and looking to export hydrogen around the world. So, and of course, that's very different from a country like the UK, which is probably not going to be exporting hydrogen because we don't have deserts with lots of sun in them, but we'll have so it'll be a different path for different countries.
Yeah, let's pick up on that UK point. What are the key priorities of the COP26 presidency to be applied at national level?
Yeah, so of course, I don't actually speak for the government, but I work closely with them because my role is to work with the non-state actor community globally. But I'd say I always like to think of this as a sort of there are three main things that the presidency has to deliver. The first is the negotiated outcome. So that's the formal role of the presidency, is to preside over the negotiations. And of course, we're not negotiating, or countries aren't negotiating their national plans or a big global deal in Glasgow. That was done in Paris. The targets were set, and the process of countries coming forward every 5 years was set. So what the actual COP negotiations will deliver will be the final bits of the rule book about Paris implementation around carbon trading, around transparency, around adaptation and resilience, etc. So those bits are not the biggest elements from the private sector point of view, but they're crucial in terms of the global trust and the politics of multilateralism. The second thing that Glasgow needs to deliver, which the UK government and its whole diplomatic network are very focused on, is enhanced national ambition all around the world. So of course, the UK will come forward with its NDC, I expect before the end of the year, which is when the original target was, although many countries will be later because of COVID. I should say NDC stands for Nationally Determined Contribution, for those who aren't climate geeks. So that's a national plan. And there's an expectation that will be ratcheted, because we're now already focusing on net zero by 2050, not later, as in Paris. The EU, of course, is, hope that the EU will come forward. Countries are starting to come forward with their plans. So that mobilization of the diplomatic effort to get more countries to come forward with more ambitious plans is ongoing. There'll be a highlight at the end of this year, the 5th anniversary of Paris, and then a lot more work next year to get those countries who haven't delivered to up their ambition, or those who have to maybe tweak it up a bit more. And then finally, there's all the momentum in the private and the local government sector where I'm focused. I think the government's working really hard, and the team, my team and the government team, to make sure that we're all moving forward on all three of those. And the government has, the UK government has 5 particular campaigns looking at finance, adaptation and resilience, nature-based solutions, transport, so phasing out the combustion engine, and the energy transition, particularly in the global south. So we're all working together to try and hit those 3 areas and make sure there's enough momentum in all of those, so that in Glasgow, the world sees that we're making significant progress towards the net zero future. I don't think we'll get every country over the line, but with the combination of multilateral, national and private and local government, then we'll aim to take a big step forward.
And at company level, companies do have climate ambitions that they published. They also, for a growing part of them, have circular economy strategies, and they don't necessarily make the link between the two. And actually, it would be helpful for them to understand to what extent their circular economy strategy also helps achieve their climate ambitions. Is there a way that a mechanism could be designed in order to help them make that link, therefore also taking more of them on board, because they're already doing things that are conducive to their objectives in a way?
Yeah, I think that's happening naturally. I mean, a lot of what me and Gonzalo are focused on is publishing a series of net zero pathways for every sector, which is going to lay out the best thinking of Ellen MacArthur Foundation and all the partners in the Marrakesh Partnership around how do we get to zero in steel, in cement, etc. So of course, where relevant, there's a big, so in those 2 sectors, for example, there's a big arrow saying, apply circularity here. So I think we're in a convergence phase. I think sometimes in the past, the circular economy has been talked about as though it was the solution to everything, and climate has been talked about as though it didn't connect with circular economy. So both of those narratives, I think, have been have needed to come together to demonstrate that you don't get to zero without circularity, and that circularity isn't the whole solution. It's a big contributor to the solution. So I think through the pathways, which we're pointing everybody to, and they'll be published in October, November. And then, of course, we're working very hard to get every company in the world to commit to zero before 2050 through this Race to Zero initiative, which Gonzalo and I launched, which already has about 1,000 companies and 500 cities and universities and investors. I think about a third of the world's population, $5 trillion of assets, already in, and then a lot more coming between now and the Paris anniversary. So hopefully those numbers will all have significantly increased by then.
And a final question, Nigel. As you look forward to COP26 just over a year from now, what outcome would satisfy you or would make you feel that the job has been done well?
Well, for me, my main focus is on getting to COP with a very clear sense that in the majority of sectors in the global economy, so across transport, materials, power, the built environment, and food and agriculture, we have achieved what you might think of as a breakthrough point when more than 20% of the main actors are committed to and on track to the zero carbon economy before 2050. I mean, it's an inexact science, but we know that roughly once you get 20% of the system on track, you're on the exponential part of the S curve, and everybody tends to follow. And that's, I think, one of the things we're really trying to do now is tell that story of exponential change, because we know that's the way that every single industrial disruption that's ever happened has gone through an S curve. So a lot of every time I hear a narrative which is linear, which is, oh, we're only at 4% EV penetration, for example, I get overexcited and jump up and down and say, yes, but we were at 2% 18 months ago. So if we're doubling every 18 months, we go 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, boom, it's game over within this decade. And we're starting to see those exponentials kick in across all the major sectors. So my biggest desire for COP26 in Glasgow was that the nations of the world and the investors of the world and the CEOs of the world and the citizens of the world all see that transition has become inevitable and decide to get on board, so that by the time we get to 2030, we have halved emissions. We're well on the way to implementing the circular economy and to creating a world which is much better for the generations to come.
Well, we're certainly very much looking forward to working with you and your team on that journey. Nigel Topping, thanks very much for joining us today.